Hello, y'all. Sorry for the lateness there. Uh, Definitely late, more than 10 minutes late, running at this. And yeah, for part two of The Century of Self, this documentary by Adam Curtis uh, about the rise of the public relations industry and the advertising industry, these forces and systems that govern a whole lot of aspects of our lives. Hello there, Holly. Uh, Great to see another night owl out there, just hanging out. We're hanging out. uh, da, 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 da. So, yeah, in part one, just to wrap up, we covered the ideas of Sigmund Freud, the emergence of those ideas, how they were revolutionary for their time, and how those ideas were used by many people, but maybe to most greatest effect in the United States by Sigmund Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, his nephew in America, who some argue gave birth and gave rise to the public relations industry. Also, we went over his connection to the ideas of Walter Lippmann, who put forward after World War I the necessity for necessary illusions, comfortable myths, and so that dealing with the public uh, on governmental issues and issues that were complex enough, you needed to engage the public with necessary myths, things that would capture their attention, simplified versions of the truth that would steer them towards the right choice, your right choice. Right on. Oh, thanks. Yes. Yeah, Pearl's got a huge day tomorrow. Uh, is headed bedwise for sure. So it covers part one, Edward Bernays' first dramatic, successful campaigns. Uh, his campaign with, I believe, Lucky Strike cigarettes for, yeah, an event on the streets of New York City on the occasion of the war ending in Europe. Uh, in order to capture for his client, Lucky Strike Cigarettes, this 50% portion of the market that they had yet to reach because there was a taboo against women smoking. So, which is 50% of the market. And if you could convince women that this taboo could be overcome or could be lifted, then you could reach another 50% of the market. And so Edward Bernays came up with this uh, idea that these suffragettes on this day would be smoking cigarettes as a symbol of freedom, torches of freedom. Of course, if you're dealing with Freud, the cigarette as well, he says, directly connected to deep libidinal forces and a particular kind of envy. So, right. And how this was successful. And then Edward Bernays went on to do multiple campaigns to represent the concerns of banking industries, politicians, United Fruit, and uh, presidents like Hoover, who needed his reputation scrubbed very thoroughly. And then to have their ideas kind of fall out of favor after the Great Depression and at the beginning of the New Deal. But Edward Bernays and his business associates and other, well, Madison Avenue and Wall Street types immediately started a kind of gang to tear down all of these things and worked for uh, the next decade. Well, actually, up until now, to tear apart everything uh, that Roosevelt had built with the New Deal. You just left Sammy Hagar scathing comment about him selling tequila when he should be using his voice to resist what is happening. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this. I mean, he has a platform. Sure. Everybody should use their platform uh, as much as possible. Of course, he wants to sell, Cabo Wabo stuff because he is the Red Rooster. Is that his moniker? Even before Van Halen, when he couldn't drive 55, some or Rocket, something like that. So yeah, it led up to these same advertising forces supporting and being somewhat reminiscent of and directly involved with the Nazi regime. So I tried to put out a spoiler warning for part one. I mean, not a spoiler, a trigger warning for part one. Yeah, trigger warning about Nazism and depictions of authoritarianism. There's going to be some authoritarianism and some depictions of Nazism, I think, in the first frame of this. So, as we're going to be shifting from Sigmund Freud and his influence through Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann and others to Anna Freud, I believe, in this one, who became, you could say, the figurehead of the psychoanalytical movement worldwide by the mid 20th century and was ministering to the most powerful people in the world and the most famous people in the world. And how, again, those same ideas got used and generalized, externalized to the general population through advertising and public relations, and how in the one instance, these ideas did not hold and did not produce the results that people wished they might. And so were not as effective as maybe these powerful psychoanalysts said they were, and thus generalized and spread about the place, did a whole lot of damage and is still doing a whole lot of damage. So, without further ado, I think I'm going to start this up. I'm going to start up this documentary. Again, I'm looking to have a conversation with y'all. Holly Lewis is here chiming in. Anybody else? This is these kinds of things, psychology, kind of mind control through advertising and PR. And these power structures is going to be kind of the topic of conversation as it pertains to this documentary. So let's see, we'll bring this up. This is just like next time on the Century of Self, which is what this is called. Was that it? That's it. No, that's not bad. Okay, we'll try that one. I think that one's we'll do that one. Okay. Hopefully this is working. Just making sure I've got the right input. Okay. Without further ado, part 2, The Century of Self by Adam Curtis, BBC, circa like 2002.
Powerful in the United States, because she believed that people could be taught to control the irrational forces within them. Out of this would come vast government programs to manage the inner psychological life of the masses.
Okay, so here is the beginning of part 2.
Let's say a word about dreams. We all have thoughts which we never knew we had. They
That
are
is
too
Anna Freud.
uncomfortable, too incompatible with our adult self to be remembered. Yet they are often disturbing, rumbling under the surface like lava in a volcano. The dream is the royal road to these thoughts, the royal road to the unconscious.
This is the story of how Sigmund Freud's ideas about the unconscious mind were used by those in power in post-war America to try and control the masses. Politicians and planners came to believe that Freud was right to suggest that hidden deep within all human beings were dangerous and irrational desires and fears.
Yep.
They were convinced that it was the unleashing of these instincts that had led to the barbarism of Nazi Germany.
It's in some part.
To stop it ever happening again, they set out to find ways to control this hidden enemy within the human mind. At the heart of the story are Sigmund Freud's daughter Anna and his nephew Edward Bernays, who had invented the profession of public relations. Their ideas were used by the US government, big business, and the CIA to develop techniques to manage and control the minds of the American people. Those in power believed that the only way to make democracy work and create a stable society was to repress the savage barbarism that lurked just under the surface of normal American life.
So one of the points this documentary tried to make in the last episode was that what the Nazis did, rather, instead of trying, when they identified these dangerous forces in people to tend towards, violence and aggression and suspicion and all of this stuff, rather than try to control it, seemingly the Nazis systematically unleashed it. Whereas this style, the American style, tries to do it, caging this same spirit in a way that the subject doesn't recognize as quickly. Gail, have a good time. Go to bed. Good to see you in here.
The story begins in the middle of the fierce fighting of the Second World War. As the fighting intensified, the American army was faced by an extraordinary number of mental breakdowns among its troops. 49% of all soldiers evacuated from combat were sent back because they suffered from mental problems.
Well,
in desperation, the army turned to the new ideas of psychoanalysis.
Mental problems.
They made a film record of the experiment using hidden cameras.
It says here on your record that you had headaches and that you had crying spells.
Yes, sir. I believe in your profession is called nostalgia.
In other words, homesickness.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
It was induced when, shortly before the war, I received a picture of my sweetheart.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I can't continue.
That's all right.
It was the first time that anyone had paid such attention to the feelings and anxieties of ordinary people.
Yeah. Again, revolutionary to even stoop to asking the soldiery how it is that they feel being in the presence of the danger of losing their lives moment to moment, on top of, well, this individual's going through a breakup of sorts, but still, um, is rather callous and insensitive times, uh, where it was surprising that they might have to look after these people after, having every danger on Earth presented to them minute to minute.
At the heart of the experiment were a number of refugee psychoanalysts from Central Europe. They worked with American psychiatrists to guide and shape the project.
When I first came to America, I worked in the psychiatric service with soldiers trying to rehabilitate them. And I traveled in the train from the East Coast to the West Coast. I was enormously curious what goes on in all of those little towns that the train is passing. After my years in the army, I knew exactly what everybody was doing in the little towns, because I saw so many people who came from there, and I understood their aspirations, their disappointments, and so forth. So it was as if somebody invited me to a privileged tour into the inner soul of America.
I'm not doing that.
Yeah, agreed, Holly. And I think some people in the military might agree that, yeah, it's this closed information system where behavior is controlled and information is controlled and thought is controlled and emotion is controlled. All of the things, the thought stopping, all of it, all of the bite model stuff. And they would say, for the purpose of having these soldiers survive their adventure through their tour of duty and be able to respond to commands under fire and not engage so much with what we would recognize as like an individual self, but as some kind of a group mind.
It's deliberate, so please believe me.
I do believe you. A display of emotion is sometimes very helpful.
I hope so, sir.
Sure, it gets it off the chest.
Well, sir, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm very much in love with my sweetheart. She has been the one person that gave me a sense of importance, in that through her cooperation with me, we were able to surmount so many obstacles.
Take it easy now, just talk
He's just heartbroken.
Psychoanalysts used techniques developed by Freud to take the men back into their past. They became convinced that the breakdowns were not the direct result of fighting. The stress of combat had merely triggered old childhood memories. These were memories of the men's own violent feelings and desires, which they had repressed because they were too frightening.
So, this is psychoanalysts. If this is correct, what this documentarian is saying, that psychoanalysts are looking beyond just the general trauma of soldiers fighting in World War II and superimposing their ideas about these hidden forces deep in the subconscious, and that rather than these people having trouble because of what they'd experienced in war, that this had triggered those same forces that they believed were already there. So to me, this is where ideology in psychiatry and psychology, or any of these disciplines, leads to the largest errors in any of these disciplines that are the longest lasting. Because especially if this ideology is powerful and holds sway, those opinions that say this dominant ideology purports are going to be very difficult to work against, and people might not even ask basic questions about why these things are the way they are. And so it's amazing that they would just overlook the general trauma of war.
Let's go back. When was it you...
To the psychoanalysts, it was overwhelming proof of Freud's theory that underneath, human beings were driven by primitive, irrational forces.
You want that?
World War II was a major shattering experience because I discovered the enormous role of the irrational in the lives of most people. Yeah, that I can say, that I learned that the ratio between the irrational and the rational in America is very much in favor of the irrational. That there is much greater unhappiness, much more suffering, much more. A sadder country than one would imagine it from the advertisements that you get.
Absolutely
a much more
sad.
problematic country.
Yes.
Victory in the Second World War was celebrated as a triumph of democracy. But in private, many policymakers were worried about the implications of the analysis of the soldiers. It seemed to show that underneath every American were irrational, violent drives. What had happened in Germany seemed to bear this out. The complicity of so many ordinary Germans in mass killings during the war showed just how easily these forces could break through and overwhelm democracy.
Planners and policymakers had been convinced by their experiences during World War II that human beings could act very irrationally because of this sort of teeming and raw and unpredictable emotionality, the kind of chaos that lived at the base of human personality could, in fact, infect the society, social institutions, to such a point that the society itself would become sick.
But again, those things that were seen during World War II had been seen before and had been cultivated systematically by that society. And the horror at discovering what, lords and kings had been taking advantage of for millennia, I think is maybe... It's like self-interested in a way, or just I don't know. That's not right. But I don't know. Definitely not looking at historical trends, and being centered on, again, your own ideology and trying to superimpose that upon every phenomena.
That's what they believe happened in Germany, in which the irrational, the anti-democratic, went wild. It was a vision of human nature as incredibly destructive, and they were terrified that Americans would in fact behave that way, or were capable of behaving that way, and they wanted to avoid a rerun of that.
So what is needed is a human being that can internalize democratic values so that they are not shaken with the storm. And psychoanalysis carried in it the promise that it can be done. It opened up new vistas as to how the inner structure of the human being can be changed so that he becomes a more vital, free supporter and maintainer of democracy.
But how are you ever going to get the majority of Americans into psychoanalysis? How are a majority of them ever going to be able to afford it, have the time, have the wherewithal, get over the taboos if you're talking the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s? And even now, how is that's a pipe dream? That's a pipe dream that you're going to be able to produce that for the society. And when in fact what's actually going to happen is that these techniques are going to be used against them through advertising. And Holly, we definitely haven't done the work as a species and as a society to be able to get beyond these base instincts. We have not. We have lied to ourselves as a society that we've lied to ourselves as people that the managers of our affairs have done anything to get beyond these things other than try to just paper over the worst aspects of what it is that this American empire does, or what we're doing globally as a species, destroying the planet's ecology to the point where every biological system on planet Earth is in decline. We have in no way evolved beyond any of these things. And I think people wish that life wasn't like this, and so try to make it seem as though it's not. And I find for most people, when you try to point these things out, how far things have gone, how tipped the tables are, how unfair things are, the wealth disparity, wealth inequality at peak levels, well, back to the old Gilded Age levels. And so, and then all of the terrible social effects along with it. I think chief among them being in the richest country in the history of the world, life expectancy going down. So year on year. So yeah, I don't know if it's cynical. I don't think it's cynical because it's not as though I think it's useless to engage because things are so bad, but I see them as much further along than I think a lot of people would like to admit, and not improved from Nazism very much at all. I mean, the United States took on a lot of those same individuals and made like our space program and our intelligence services and a bunch of other things.
The psychoanalysts were convinced they not only understood these dangerous forces, but they knew how to control them too.
Yeah, right.
They would use their techniques to create democratic individuals, because democracy left to itself failed to do this. The source of this idea was not only Sigmund Freud, but his youngest daughter, Anna.
Yep.
She had fled with her father to London before the outbreak of war.
Interesting character.
And after he died, Anna Freud became the acknowledged leader of the world psychoanalytic movement. She saw her job as to fulfill her father's dream of making his ideas accepted throughout the world.
This documentary is not
But the
kind
center of the Freud
Anna
movement stood Tante Anna because she managed to work herself into that position. She was recognized as that, and not just because she was the daughter. She worked on that.
Yeah.
She was rather forbidding. She was not, to me, a warm person, not an aunt you could kiss or put your arms around. Not at all. And her whole life
Using pictures to
around the
frame
spreading
that
of
feeling.
psychoanalysis.
Freud himself had seen the role of psychoanalysis as allowing people to understand their unconscious drives. But Anna Freud believed it was possible to teach individuals how to control these inner forces. She had come to believe this through analyzing children, above all the children of her close friend, Dorothy Burlingham.
Teacher.
Dorothy Burlingham was an American millionairess who in the
Leave them kids
1920s
alone.
fled a failed marriage and brought her children to Anna Freud in Vienna. They were suffering terrible anxieties and aggression. But Anna Freud was convinced she could free them from this by changing the world around them.
She thought that she could come in and into their environment, essentially, because they were children, you see. They didn't have independent lives of their own. She could go talk to the parents or the mother. She could go to the schools. She could influence their real world, the actual external world, to change their lives and to help them.
And to change them as people?
I think that was part of what her idea was, is that she felt that she could change them.
From her analysis of the Birmingham children, Anna Freud developed a theory of how to help them control their inner drives. She believed that if, as well as psychotherapy, they were also encouraged to adapt to a good family and social environment, then the conscious part of their mind, the ego, would be strengthened in its struggle to control the unconscious. Anna Freud's aim was simply to help the children. But it was always the psychoanalyst who decided what was the right environment and the appropriate behavior for the children.
So this gets into what I think one of my major criticism of this entire movement and a whole side of psychology and psychiatry in this era, and as much as it ever exists anywhere, to say that there are these societal norms, right? These are the preferred societal norms, or they're just the dominant societal norms so that they're good. And deference to those societal norms means that an individual is going to be in more accord with what most people are doing, and thus experience less resistance, rejection, and stress in their lives. And so paramount amongst all other concerns is to bring your client into accord with these societal norms so that they will experience less stress. And so that this means, and they're about to get into this, if you are homosexual, well, in 1960, whatever, this is going to bring you a whole lot of stress. This is definitely against a whole bunch of societal norms, and we have to eradicate this behavior so that you don't go through life experiencing all of this host of whatever. So basically, this movement and Anna Freud attempted to remold and shape people into what they believed the idealized form of these norms were, or at least a version that they believed their client could fit into, with terrible results. Yeah, exactly. F that, Holly Lewis. F that. But that's I mean, that's a lot of what these therapies were. What we would call conversion therapy later on, done by churches. There's an attempt by some psychoanalysts and other psychologists and psychiatrists of various stripes to alter and change people away from those kinds of behaviors or themselves, right? And it goes into the diagnostic models. It goes into how homosexuality, same-sex attraction, how gender dysmorphia were all diagnosed under DSM 1 through 4 revised. And even 5 to a degree it's still not good. And the entire model is suspect in a way because of how, well, DSM, if you look up any of these things, you've got this psychopathology if you meet like this criteria of a constellation of symptoms over a period of time that impairs one or an array, depending on what the diagnostic model is, one or array of like major life activities, like your work, if your depression or your anxiety or your psychosis or your OCD or any of these things are they occur over 6 months, say, they have all of these symptoms, or like you meet 3 of like all of these 12 that are listed and you've got it. And if it impairs like your sleep and your work, boom, you've got that diagnosis. You say, I had a friend whose father put him in conversion therapy in Texas. His sister had to rescue him. Yeah, it's disgusting. So yeah, no, psychology was on about doing this to try to change the person, and here we go.
And often as not, this reflected the social mores of the time.
It's so sad, really, this story.
In my father's case, they were concerned that he would be a homosexual. And so a lot of their efforts went into preventing or trying to stop my father from becoming a homosexual. Whether or not he would have or did, or, it's unknown to me.
Why did they want to stop him?
Because they felt it was abnormal. It wasn't a normal way to develop.
It's
They
going to
wanted
be
have
highly
him
aberrated.
develop along lines that society recognized to be normal, because if they didn't, then you're going to be under the control of forces that you don't understand, that you're not even aware of.
The analysis seemed to be a great success, and in the 30s the Burlingham children had returned to America. They settled down to happy married lives in the suburbs. What they didn't realize was that their experience was about to become a template for a giant social experiment to control the inner mental life of the American population.
So, yeah, you're going to have a more stressful life because of your homosexuality, and that needs to be dealt with as if we're removing like a skin disease or something. And not taking into account that individual is trying to express themselves, and the feeling of hopelessness that comes over people when they believe that they cannot have any chance of being their true selves in the world, and that they're going to have to live a lie. Well, we know what the result is. It's death. It's more often than need be, and at alarming rates, and especially over something that's foundational to one's personality is how they perceive themselves in relation to other people sexually and romantic, as there's so much importance that's put on those things. It's really terrible that this ever happened, and that it was seen as sound scientific practice. It reminds me that we always need to be constantly critical and revising our methods given the new information coming from our research, where we're investigating our methods and their efficacy, and not giving into ideology like this.
In 1946, President Truman signed the National Mental Health Act. It had been born directly out of the wartime discoveries by psychoanalysts that millions of Americans who had been drafted suffered hidden anxieties and fears. The aim of the act was to deal with this invisible threat to society.
Shocked by the appalling percentage of the emotionally unstable revealed by the World War II draft figures, Congress in 1946 passed the National Mental Health Act, which recognized for the first time that mental illness was a national problem.
Yeah, but
keenly aware of the tremendous problems ahead is Dr. Robert H. Felix, director of the vast new project.
A primary objective of the National Mental Health Program is to increase our fund of scientific knowledge about mental health.
Johnny, that was a great day. That was a beautiful day, and you've got a beautiful frickin' ride there. Good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
And about mental illness. We're not doing this. Why? Because there are all too few skilled mental health workers.
Two of the principal architects of the Act were the Menninger brothers, Carl and Will. Will had run the wartime psychotherapy experiments, and now he and his brother began to train hundreds of new psychiatrists. The Menningers were convinced that it would be possible to apply Anna Freud's ideas on a wide scale, and to adults as well as children. The psychiatrist's job would be to teach ordinary Americans how to control their unconscious drives. Psychoanalysis could be used to make a better society.
They said psychoanalytic thinking could make for the betterment of society because you could change the way the mind functioned. And you could take the ways in which people did hurtful things to themselves and others and alter them by enlarging their understanding. And this was the vision psychoanalysis brought.
That you could really change people.
That you could really change people.
Yes. Yeah, Crystal. I think I agree there's a resurgence of the idea of forcing people back into these norms, running around, especially in the United States, but the right wingification of the world is also happening. It's happening in a lot of places where people are expressing a frustration with anything resembling progressivism. And especially, you could say, white males, and especially the youth vote that was captured by Trump this time, 20-something-year-old guys that are captured by the manosphere and delivered directly into his hands, look to me especially dangerous because of how disaffected they are and how much they resemble populations of young men at the beginning of other authoritarian regimes. It's exactly what you need. These disaffected, hopeless in their prospects, angry, unfulfilled young folk looking for purpose and looking for an enemy. So you can give them both of those things. Trump can give them both of those things. These online influencers, these manosphere people, they can absolutely capture these people, marshal all of them, and deploy them as a group. And we're seeing that. So we're seeing in that they're like all of the advances that we've had with well, women's rights and just the recognition of, say, gender and sex preference being a spectrum, not, being a binary, not being straight or gay or, oh, and then bi, I guess we'll accept that. And then, oh, trans, you're making me accept that. And I think about 2014, I was hearing from so many people, geez, there's all this stuff coming and I just accepted gay people and now you're making me accept all this stuff. This kind of, hey, you're making me learn too fast shit was going around. Yeah, AI will be taking even more jobs. You bet. Yeah. Yeah, it's a scary future right now. Well, there's no sure footing anywhere. There's no place where you could say, oh, yeah, okay, so if I get, a credential for this and get a job, say I go and get like my LMHC or something, and one of the spaces that AI is going after is mental health counselors. And so you're going to have like a chatbot AI mental health counselor that's going to be deployed. It's going to put all of those people out of work. AI is quickly destroying my creative industry, the music industry. It's destroying graphic designers. It's destroying technical writing. It's destroying copywriting. It's all of these things that took somebody's mind, we're going to get a cheap and poor facsimile of as a replacement, just like the plastics industry. You could get like disposable anything that's the shape of the thing that you may have had that was real, that was made out of porcelain or steel or aluminum or something. And yeah, now you can get the shape of that and it's not as durable, but it will kind of work, and it will poison you and everything around you just a little bit. So yeah. So yes, these forces that are going, so all of these psychoanalysts saying we're going to free the mind, and here comes corporate America that's always going to use those same techniques and be like, oh yeah, we'll free the mind right into our clients' freaking clutches.
and you could change them almost in limitless
Same
ways.
move every time.
In the late 40s, a vast project began in America to apply the ideas of psychoanalysis to the masses. Psychological guidance centers were set up in hundreds of towns. They were staffed by psychiatrists who believed it was their job to control the hidden forces inside the minds of millions of ordinary Americans.
Yes, I need something done. I need some help.
We all need some help.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any particular teachers that you liked?
But we don't get it.
I liked all my teachers except one, I remember.
What was the trouble with this one?
I don't know, she just scared me most of the time. Holler at me and I'd run outside and vomit.
I hate my brother. Loathe him. Despise him.
Yeah. So yeah, we're getting into people's reactions to just the idea of psychoanalysis here as it's being, hey, you could do this too. So Crystal, thanks y'all for bringing this stuff up and being and sharing of your personal lives. I think this is instructive here. But yeah, absolutely. Any parent that I've talked to recently with young kids that are subject to this kind of stuff are all worried about how very quickly the tone of the material that's online, and specifically we're talking about the stuff that's available and targeted at young men, to capture them into this bigoted, hateful, misogynistic, self-interested, aggressive ideology. We're all scared, I think, for all young people. 1984, one of the scariest ideas in 1984 to me is what the party did to children, which is to turn them into the secret police for the state. And so if you were to resist the state, the most dangerous people around you are the kids, because they're just wrapped up in this authoritarian ideology from the cradle, have no resistance to it, have no idea that there's anything outside of it, and will just be playing a game that you're gonna lose if you don't do all of the freaking multitude of things that an authoritarian regime will demand of you. Thank you for sharing, Crystal. Absolutely.
At the same time, thousands of counselors were trained to apply psychoanalysis to marriage guidance. And social workers were sent out to visit people's homes and advise on the psychological structure of family life. Behind all this was the fundamental idea of Anna Freud's, that if people were encouraged to conform to the accepted patterns of family and social life, then their ego would be strengthened. They would be able to control the dangerous forces within them.
When your emotions
You might be
control your
aware
actions,
of them,
it affects not only yourself, but the people around you.
but it might even give
And
you a
if
false
this sort of
awareness,
flare-up
thinking
is
that you
repeated
have
often,
mastered
it
your
might lead to a
subconscious
permanently warped
forces, when that's
personality.
nearly impossible for
You
anyone.
can control the fire of your emotion so that your personality becomes more pleasant.
So we expect that someone who's been through that experience to be much more insightful, much more...
So notice at the very end of that news clip, that newsreel, the goal isn't to, I don't know, enhance your life, enhance your awareness, make you anything other than more pleasant, right? So about meeting people or just being agreeable. Now, who just wants you to be agreeable? I think people that want to control a large number of people all at once would like all of you to just go along to get along.
understanding and a much better regulated person.
Oh, you better go along.
And regulation
to get along.
includes being able to let go, as it were, to enjoy a football game or a soccer game.
Oh, that's interesting way of stepping.
A more understanding, yes, rational, but also appropriately emotional person. that the regulatory aspects of the human mind would really be in charge. Instead of being overwhelmed by our passions and by our darker impulses. That one would be master or mistress of one's own passions.
They just felt that the road to happiness.
It's hilarious. Okay, so, psychology, psychiatry is trying to do this. Like a bunch of cults are trying to do this. The self-help movement is trying to do this. Scientology is trying to do this, amongst a bunch of other cults. Obviously, cults like Aleister Crowley are trying to free yourself from these dark impulses of the subconscious, or whatever they're calling it, by engaging with it directly, as far and as fast maybe as you can go, and a process that annihilates just about every person that comes in contact with it. But yeah, gross. A lot of similarities here with control, just in general.
Happiness was in adapting to the external world in which they lived. That people could be uncrippled from their own neurotic conflicts and impulses, that they would not engage in self-destructive behavior, that they would in fact adapt to the reality about them. They never questioned the reality. They never questioned that it might itself be a source of evil or something to which you could not adapt.
Yeah.
Without compromise, or without suffering, or without exploiting yourself in some way.
Yeah,
So-
adapt to this thing. This guy's, I love this guy. They didn't even ask the question, like, are we asking people to adapt to something that's not good for them, or that even is inherently evil?
There was this fit with the politics of the day.
And a balance of emotions is important
Look at this
to a
diagram.
well-rounded personality.
But it was only the beginning of the rise to power of psychoanalysis in America.
Well, it's a circle. It's pretty
Psychoanalysts were
well-rounded.
about to move into big business and use their techniques not just to create model citizens, but model consumers.
Well,
Last week's episode showed how Freud's American nephew, Edward Bernays, had been the first to convince American corporations that they could sell products by connecting them with people's unconscious feelings.
and he did it.
But now, a group of psychoanalysts were going to take what
Didn't
Bernays had
just
begun
convince them of it.
and
He
invent
did
a
it.
whole range of techniques to get inside and manage the unconscious mind of the consumer. They were led by Ernest Dichter. Dichter had practiced next door to Freud in Vienna, but he had come to America and set up the Institute for Motivational Research in an old mansion north of New York.
This is the Institute for Motivational Research, a place devoted to the intriguing business of finding out why people behave as they do, why they buy as they do, why they respond to advertising as they do. And this is Dr. Ernest Dichter.
We don't go out and ask directly,
Great
why
name,
do you buy, why
Ernie.
don't you? What we try to do instead is to understand the total personality, the self-image of the customer. We use all the resources of modern social sciences. It opens up some stimulating psychological...
Yeah. Okay. So you figure out the personality of their wants, their likes, their preferences, in this kind of personality profile. And then through like flattery and trickery and exposing them to maybe this object of desire that they can't publicly say that they want, but you can euphemistically present it in a way within, I guess, a TV dinner. By the way, here we go. TV dinner. Tucker Carlson's family fortune is built on stuff just like that.
techniques for selling any new product.
Like the other psychoanalysts, Dichter believed that American citizens were fundamentally irrational beings. They could not be trusted. Their real reasons for buying products were rooted in unconscious desires and feelings. And Dichter wanted to find ways
Because
to
they
uncover what he
produced
called
that
the secret
effect in
self
people.
of the American consumer.
He was trying to get out of people's mind the unconscious motivations that they had for purchasing. These could be sexual, they could be psychological, they could be sociological, they could be a demand for status, a demand for recognition. There were things that people couldn't verbalize or wouldn't verbalize because they were too secret to them. They were
So
too
you
much
can
part of their
communicate
nature,
these
and
things to
they would be
them
embarrassed. They would be embarrassed if they came out
that
and
they
said
can't
things
even
like this.
talk about.
He would interview people, but not ask them direct questions, but let them talk freely like you do in psychoanalysis. And
Free
that was
association
his background.
is the
And so he
technique.
said, why can't we have a group therapy session about products? All right? And so
A group
Victor-
therapy session about products. This is the focus group, right? So, and the group therapy session about products is Facebook, is Twitter, is social media in general, is YouTube. I mean, how much information do we willingly give about our preferences and what we may like or not like about different products, or people that are just doing streams about products and hawking them, right? Or their whole page is about that. Being an influencer is about hawking stuff. And so we become addicted to influencers who are presenting information in a particular way, in these particular ways, in order to rob you of kind of your better senses, to get you kind of, oh, and then to tickle your fancy a little bit, and then to present you with maybe a value statement about a product. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, everybody is trying to negotiate their perspective, right? And some people's perspectives have become commercialized.
built this room up above his garage, and he said we can have psychoanalysis of products. They can actually act out and verbalize their wants and needs.
What we're going to do is try a couple of these.
I love
salad
my
dressings.
toilet paper so
Well,
much.
let's see what happens.
You know, your
Here's our
emotional
typical
connection.
housewife. She doesn't follow the instructions.
And they could be observed and watched, and other people could comment, and they could talk about it, and everybody could join in. He was the first to do this. This was absolutely the first thing that was ever done.
Yes.
And he had a movie projector up there where you could show advertisements and things like that, and people could react to them.
Yep.
And he invented the whole technique for mining the unconscious about the hidden psychological wants that people had about products.
That's what you need. You
This
need the
became
feedback.
the focus group.
It
Yeah.
worked.
In order to
Victor's
refine
breakthrough
these
came with a
processes.
focus group study he did for Betty Crocker Foods. Like many food manufacturers in the early 50s, they had invented a new range of instant convenience foods.
Please, this is a
But
very
although consumers had
important
told
point.
market researchers they would welcome the idea, in fact, they were refusing to buy them.
Yeah, Betty
The
Crocker.
worst problem was the Betty Crocker cake mix. Dictor did a series of focus groups where housewives free associated about the cake mix. He concluded that they felt unconscious guilt at the new image being promoted of ease and convenience.
In other words, he understood that the barrier to the consumption of the product was the housewife's feeling of guilt about using it. They basically, on one hand, wanted to make it easy for themselves, but they felt guilty about it. So what you've got to do in those circumstances is remove the barrier being guilt. The way you do that is to give the housewife a greater sense of participation
And how do you do that?
by adding an egg.
Simple as that.
As simple as that.
Yeah, adding an egg. You get to engage. You're doing something. The Betty Crocker has made all of this from scratch stuff. No, we've got it. We've got it all ready for you. And so just like maybe whipping that up and throwing it in a pan and heating it up, that seemed like cheating in the 1950s. But yeah, no, that Italian dresser container, absolutely. And then, you know, give it the shaky shake. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, whoops. Yeah, subliminal advertising. Yeah, I think that's going to come up too. Yeah, single frames. anything, all sorts.
Dictor told Betty Crocker to put an instruction on the packet that the housewife should add an egg. It would be an unconscious symbol, he said, of the housewife mixing in her own eggs as a gift to her husband, and so would lessen the guilt. Betty Crocker did it, and the sales soared.
It totally worked.
My cake is ready.
The consumer may have basic needs that the consumer himself or herself doesn't fully.
This video that's playing in the background is a General Electric, like, kitchen of tomorrow, and I think she goes away in a fancy car. She's having like a dream of all of these products. And so this is like this character in a dream state, but it's like a product crazy film reel that goes for 10 minutes. It's quite amazing. I'll find the entire thing and maybe we'll watch it at some point.
Understand. You have to know what those needs are in order to fully exploit the consumer. Is it wrong to give people what they want by taking away their defenses?
Yes.
Helping remove their defenses?
I think it's wrong. I think if you are marring somebody's free will, if you are downgrading somebody's defenses to other people's ideas, you're doing damage to that person. You're doing damage to their ability to resist ideas like this in general. You're making that, so if you agree with this, on this basis, on an emotional basis, on this subliminal or subconscious basis, can't other people access kind of or remove your free will and better senses for their own purposes by those same means? And what I say to try to illustrate this, it's like these people, these organizations, these firms, for their clients are attempting to drill a hole in your head and to place into that hole a funnel so that they can have easy access then to pour in as much as they like, unfiltered, the messages of what their clients may want you to buy or like or do or anything, politically, financially, commercially, etc., etc.
It seems so much longer than last year.
It is. Nearly 4 inches longer in some models.
Oh.
I mean,
Dictor's success led to a rush by corporations and advertising agencies to employ psychoanalysts. They became known as the depth players, and they promised to show companies how to make millions by connecting their products with people's hidden desires. Dictor himself became a millionaire, famous for inventing slogans like "a tiger in your tank." Even the marketing of the Barbie doll came from a children's focus group.
And so it goes.
But Dictor was convinced that this was far more than just selling. Like Anna Freud, he believed that the environment could be used to strengthen the human personality. And products have the power both to sate inner desires and give people a feeling of common identity with those around them.
But in fact, it weakens
It was a strategy
you.
for creating a stable society. Dictor called it the strategy of desire.
To understand a stable citizen, you have to know that modern man quite often tries to work off his
Gross
frustrations by
commercialism is
spending
what
on
it is.
self-gratification.
Disgusting.
Modern man is eternally ready to fill out his self-image by purchasing products which complement it.
If you identify yourself with a product, it can have a therapeutic value.
Ew.
It improves your self-image.
This is Dictor's
and
spouse.
you
She's
become
very
a
excited
more
about these
secure
ideas.
person, and you have suddenly this confidence of going out in the world and doing what you want successfully.
You know, even I have to imagine that from my experience of the people that I've known in the ad game and the family members that have been in it, that they would even laugh at that individual's exuberance about those ideas. It's, yeah, Crystal, I'm in love with my car. Yes. No, they want you to be in love with your car. They want you to be in love with your Cuisinart blender. They want you to be in love with how much your kids are in love with their My Buddy doll. You know, they want you to have an emotional relationship with your toothpaste, with your floss, with your floor wax. Absolutely. Lady Jane out, good to see you in here. Yeah, we're going into the part 2 of this documentary series, going into the ad game and how they use the height of psychological techniques of any given age in order to remove us of our better senses. Welcome in. It's great conversation tonight.
Believe that
Great to see you
would
all
then
here.
improve the whole of our society and become the best society on this planet.
Yeah. The greater good. Yeah. For
By
corporations.
the early 50s, the ideas of psychoanalysis had penetrated deep into American life. The psychoanalysts themselves became rich and powerful. Many had consulting rooms overlooking Central Park in New York.
Seriously.
Politicians and famous writers like Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams became their patients. They were seeking not just help, but to understand the hidden roots of human behavior.
We were sought after. Washington was interested in what we think. You know, the important writers, important politicians were undergoing psychoanalysis. It was, we had waiting lists because there were so many patients that wanted to be analyzed.
Yeah.
So it gave us a little bit of a swellhead.
And nobody
And as
could
the
get into
psychoanalyst
those
ideas
rooms
took hold in America,
besides the
a
rich
new
and
elite
powerful
began to emerge
and
in
famous.
politics, social planning, and in business.
This was not for
What linked this elite was the assumption that the masses
regular
were
folk.
fundamentally irrational. To make a free market democracy like America work, one had to use psychological techniques to control mass irrationality.
They actually believed that this elite was necessary because individual citizens were not capable, if left alone,
Yes.
of being democratic citizens.
It was
The
Walter
elite was
Lippmann's
necessary
idea
in
as
order
well.
to create the conditions that would produce individuals capable
The manufacturing
of behaving
of
as
consent.
a good consumer
Yeah,
and also behaving
citizen.
as a democratic
Yeah.
citizen. They didn't see their activities as anti-democratic,
Martha,
as undermining the
to
capacity
see
of
you.
individual citizens for democracy. Quite the opposite. They understood that they were creating the conditions for democracy's survival and future.
That's what
Anna
they
Freud
thought.
had never intended that her
That's what
ideas
my
be
family
used in
member
such a
thought.
way. But she
That's
happily
what they
accepted
said.
the rise to power of psychoanalysis in America. She remained in England, living with Dorothy Burlingham. On the surface, it was an idyllic life. She and Dorothy had bought a weekend cottage on the Suffolk coast. And in the summers, Dorothy's children came from America to visit with the grandchildren.
Yeah, again, Anna Freud and Dorothy Burlingham, Anna Freud, Sigmund's daughter. Yeah, not capable, freaking crazy. Yeah, these people's cynical view of humanity, and that, you know, we need to have these blinders on and this particular buggy whip in order to take the yoke and not spit the bit.
But underneath, things were going badly wrong. Both Bob and Mabby Burlingham, who Anna Freud had analysed in the 1930s, had suffered personal breakdowns, and their marriages were collapsing.
It's her most famous
Bob was drinking
patients.
heavily, and Mabby suffered terrible anxieties. The real reasons for the visits to England were yet more analysis with Anna Freud.
Well, the problem was that it didn't look very good, did it? Because here you have somebody who's having nervous breakdowns and is having alcoholic binges. And this is not exactly, doesn't really sit well. Well, from a humane standpoint, obviously this is not desirable. You want to help these people, but it also had the wider ramifications of everybody in analysis, in analytic circles, knew that Bob and Mabby were guinea pigs. They were the living proof that this was a wonderful process.
But it's not.
It was very much
going
swept
well.
under the rug. It didn't get out.
Yeah.
I mean, these people had such
Power.
Their power and influence was such that you were very careful. Anna Freud was a very powerful person, and
Absolutely. These people are saying what the brain is, what desires are, how it functions, how that relates to how the world functions, what a properly adjusted person is, and what an aberration is. They're able to say these things. The Wizards of Oz themselves, people that are able to basically dictate some section of reality or human experience, they hold immense power, power beyond money, the power of ideas. That is the high ground. And especially now in the information age, it's going to get you all the money ever. The ideas, the powerful ideas. Yes, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Another woman under siege by Freudian analysis. So it's Anna Freud and Dorothy Burlingham, this aristo who had a failed marriage and put her kids into psychoanalysis in order to save them from themselves. The male, in Anna Freud's mind, suffering, quote unquote, from homosexuality that needed to be cured. And so now suffering from breakdowns and alcoholism, obviously, from just not being actualized as themselves. And it's about to get tragic.
And you were the grandchildren, and she knew a great deal more than you did about what went on in your parents' lives and so forth. It was not something you were going to tangle with, and you were a product of the whole situation. But at the same time, we all knew that something was really out of whack.
As she grew older, she became more and more important, didn't she? Politically and scientifically, but she didn't know when to stop. She was a bit too righteous. What she did was always the thing, and she would never, to my knowledge, acknowledge that she could make a mistake. Or
Anybody that says that they have the answer, the highest revealed truth, or anything like that, they're selling you something, and they might be deluded themselves.
Be wrong. That is my feeling.
But the power and influence of the Freud family in America was about to grow even more. Politicians were about to turn to Anna Freud's cousin, Edward Bernays, for help in a time of crisis. He was going to manipulate the inner feelings and fears of the masses to help America's politicians fight the Cold War.
Duck and cover, everyone.
I don't mean to say, and no one
Duck
can
and
say
cover.
that there are no dangers. Of course there are risks if we are not vigilant, but we do not have to be hysterical.
In 1953, the Soviet Union exploded its first hydrogen bomb, and the fear of nuclear war and communism gripped the United States. Those in power became concerned about how to reassure the population. Committees were set up and public information films made, appealing for calm in the face of new threats, like nuclear fallout.
It's the fallacy of devoting 85% of one's worrying capacity to an agent that constitutes only about 15%.
It's this terror and the atmosphere of this kind of post-war new nuclear horror terror that in the 1950s, these corporate jerk faces, a lot of cults and Scientology all used this fear to turn people out to, well, whatever it was that they were selling.
Of an atomic bomb's destroying potential.
At this point, Edward Bernays was living in New York. In the 1920s, he had invented the profession of public relations.
Amazing.
And was now one of the most powerful PR men in America. He worked for most of the major corporations and advised politicians, including President Eisenhower. Like his uncle Sigmund, Bernays was convinced that human beings were driven by irrational
Yes,
forces.
we are.
The only way to deal with the public was to connect with their unconscious desires and fears. Bernays argued that instead of trying to reduce people's fear of communism, one should actually encourage and manipulate the fear.
Oh,
in such a
yeah.
way as it became a weapon in the Cold War.
It's amazing.
Rational argument was fruitless.
Yeah, so from the top down, communist fear, Red Scare, Edward Bernays is saying, no, lean into this. And so we get McCarthy, we get Nixon, we get these screaming denizens of anti-communism in the 1950s as a result of somebody like Edward Bernays saying that this is a worthwhile project for like public psychology.
What my father understood about groups is that they are manipulable, they're malleable, and that you can tap into their deepest desires or their deepest fears and use that to your own purposes.
I mean, P.T. Barnum knew
I don't think he
that.
felt that all those publics out there had reliable judgment.
They don't.
They very easily might vote for the wrong man or want the wrong thing.
Good one, Chris.
So that they had to be guided from above.
One of Bernays' main clients was the giant United Fruit Company.
Yeah.
They owned vast banana plantations in Guatemala in Central America. For decades.
United Fruit, Edward Bernays, and the public relations industry. So industry, public relations, the Central Intelligence Agency.
Decades, United Fruit had controlled the country through pliable dictators. It was known
Directly
as a banana
connected,
republic.
working lockstep.
But in
For
1950,
America.
a young officer, Colonel Arbenz, was elected president. He promised to remove United Fruit's control over the country. And in 1953, he announced the government would take over much of their land. It was a massively popular move, but a disaster for United Fruit, when they turned to Bernays to help get rid of Arbenz.
United Fruit brings in Bernays, and he basically understood that what United Fruit Company had to do was change this from being a popularly elected government that was doing some things that were good for the people there into this being very close to the American shore, a threat to American democracy, that it being at a time in the Cold War when Americans responded to issues of the Red Scare and what communism might do.
Any kind of
He was trying to
slightly
transform
left-wing
this and
government
brilliantly did
in what
transform
the
it into an
CIA
issue of
called
a
the
communist threat
backyard,
very
Central
close
and
to our
South
shores,
America.
taking United Fruit again as a commercial client out of the picture and making it look like a question of American democracy, American values being threatened.
Totally. It's not
In
United
reality,
Fruit's interests,
Arbenz
it's
was a
America
democratic
that
socialist
they're
with no
attacking
links to Moscow.
with their social programs
Bernays
in
set out to
Guatemala.
turn him into a communist threat to America. He organized a trip to Guatemala for influential American journalists. Few of them knew anything about the country or its politics. Bernays arranged for them to be entertained and to meet selected Guatemalan politicians who told them that Arbenz was a communist controlled by Moscow.
Yep.
During the trip, there was also a violent anti-American demonstration in the capital. Many of those who worked for United Fruit were convinced it had been organized by Bernays himself.
I mean,
He also
they keep
created a
doing
fake
this, so
independent
it makes
news
sense.
agency in America called the Middle American Information Bureau. It bombarded the American media with press releases saying that Moscow was planning to use Guatemala as a beachhead to attack America. All of this had the desired effect.
In Guatemala, the Jacob Arbenz regime became increasingly communistic after its inauguration in 1951. Communists in the Congress and high governmental positions
Bernays
controlled
says.
major committees, labor and farm groups, and propaganda facilities. They agitated.
So a full court press from every angle that you can have access to as the head of the public relations industry to convince the United States that not just United Fruit is being attacked, but democracy itself and through the Soviet Union. So it's going to take what is basically somebody looking to, well, an organization like United Fruit looking to improve their bottom line by being able to more easily exploit the areas where their resource comes from, and they're not going to be able to do that under a more left-leaning leadership. And so everything must be done to eliminate that individual and all support that they might have, so that you can make a buck on bananas next year. This is, but it's America. You know?
Participated and led in demonstrations against neighboring countries and the United States.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to say, I almost forgot, Martha. What are you, psychic? That next part, the part 3 of what you're saying there, that is coming up. Yeah. Maybe in part 3, but it is connected.
He took this menace to our backyard in Guatemala. For the first time, we saw Reds a couple hundred miles from New Orleans, who Eddie Bernays had us believing were a true threat to us, that it was going to be a Soviet outpost in our backyard.
Yeah, people
But what Bernays
legitimately
was doing
believe
was not
that.
just trying to blacken the Arbenz regime.
And they
He was
still
part of a
do.
secret plot. President Eisenhower had agreed that America
They
should
did the
topple
same thing with
Arbenz
Venezuela.
government, but secretly. The CIA were instructed to organize a coup. Working with the United Fruit Company, the CIA trained
Like the
and armed
pressure
the rebel
campaign,
army
the protests, the
and found a new
coup,
leader for
the whole
country called
process,
Colonel
they
Armas.
on repeat over and
The
over
CIA
again.
agent in charge was Howard Hunt, later one of the Watergate burglars.
What we wanted to do was have a terror campaign.
Ladies and gentlemen, E. Howard Hunt. Okay, so Martha, I know you know who this person is, but like a lot of people, this is one of the most infamous figures of the mid-20th century who was at everything, all of the major awful things that the CIA did. He was there for, and probably running a fair amount of it. So he knew where so many of the bodies were buried, and was a central character in Watergate, who organized the burglary and the payoff of the burglars of the Watergate. And it was him and his demand to Howard Dean, saying that his people who had been caught needed to be paid $1 million, right? And E. Howard Hunt. Yeah, so Howard Dean, the tape that got Nixon burned, when Howard Dean's in the White House, in the Oval Office, says to the president, it seems like Hunt's guys, they're going to want $1 million. And basically Howard Dean says in interviews later, I thought I was just throwing out some huge number that was going to be impossible. There's going to be no way that he could engage with it. It was going to be out of reach. And to his surprise, immediately, Richard Nixon says, well, I know where you can get $1 million. Not easy, not soon, but $1 million cash. And that's the one that did him. That he knew full well the operation. He knew full well the cover-up. He knew full well and was directing the money. So, yeah. No, at the Kennedy assassination too, absolutely. And the Bay of Pigs. Martha, you got it. E. Howard Hunt, one of the most infamous people. You should check out his deathbed confessional. I wouldn't believe it, but it is interesting.
To terrify Arbenz particularly, terrify his troops, much as the German Stuka bombers terrified the population of Holland, Belgium, and Poland at the onset of World War II, and just rendered everybody paralyzed.
Hey, we were just like the Germans.
Pilots dropped bombs on Guatemala
And he
City.
was kind of proud
Edward
of that.
Bernays carried on his propaganda campaign in the American press. He was preparing the American population to see this as the liberation of Guatemala by freedom fighters for democracy.
He totally understood that the coup would happen when the public and the press when conditions in the public and the press allowed for a coup to happen, and he created those conditions. He was totally
And then you can
savvy
do
in
it
terms
without
of just
resistance,
what
without
he
the
was helping
international
create in
community,
terms of his
without your
overthrow.
own people
But
coming
ultimately,
after
he
you.
was reshaping reality,
Yeah.
reshaping
No,
public
if
opinion.
that's the manufacture of consent right there. If you're able to get the public to go along with it, this is what happens in advance of every war, every military action, every removal of a basic right, the targeting of an ethnic minority or religion uh, for abuse by the state. Um, they're all run in the same way, where you have this massive explosion of messaging to the public directed to engage as many people as possible in this kind of morality play about what it is uh, that you're trying to achieve. And so if it's you're trying to take over the duly elected government of Guatemala, then it's a smear campaign, it's a fear campaign. They're going to destroy us, they're going to destroy our way of life. They don't actually believe in it. They're in league with our greatest enemy who wishes to destroy us and everybody like us on the planet. This is how they get us to pick up a gun. This is how they get us to hate our neighbor, to hate the person that we don't know over the fence in the other country, that we haven't met before, that we have no reason to hate. This is all of the excuses for the genocide in Palestine, and just trying to by engaging the public in the horrors of what happened in October 7th, to for this whole time excuse the escalating horrors that are happening, the greatest crime of our generation occurring right now. And all of these techniques are being used against all of us, so that a generation of people who lived through Vietnam or lived through the forever wars, their grandparents and parents of the kids that are protesting these things now are spitting on these kids having their diplomas removed from them, who are making courageous speeches this week during graduations across the country speaking against this genocide, are being vilified and having these same techniques used against them as well. It happens in every war. Look out for it. If you didn't already know, it seems like I'm preaching to the converted tonight here.
Undemocratic and manipulative.
On June the 27th, 1954, Colonel Arbenz fled the country, and Armas arrived as the new leader.
Yep.
Within months, Vice President Nixon visited Guatemala.
Oh,
in an event
Mr.
staged
Red
by
Scare
United
himself.
Fruit's PR department, he was shown piles of Marxist literature that had been found, it was said, in the presidential palace.
Well,
this is the first time in the history of the world that the communist government has been overthrown by the people.
I can't believe he's a
we
Quaker.
Congratulate you and the people of Guatemala.
It's the
for
worst
support they
Quaker
have
I've
given.
ever heard of.
And we are sure that under your leadership, supported by the people whom I have met by the hundreds on my visit to Guatemala, that Guatemala is going to enter a new era in which there will be prosperity for the people together with liberty for the people. Thank you very much for allowing us to see this exhibit of communism in Guatemala.
You're welcome. And for dinner, see what Mother has for dessert. Banana gingerbread shortcake. Just another of the many tempting ways in which this nutritious fruit can be prepared. So now that you've seen where bananas come from before they reach your table, our journey to Banana Land is ended. We hope you enjoyed the trip. We know you like bananas.
Yeah.
Bernays had manipulated the American people, but he had done so because he, like many others at the time, believed that the interests of business and the interests of America...
No, but if you wonder why people conform, if you wonder why people engage in these modes of thought or vote against their own interests or engage in groupthink and any of these things that you find disturbing, these techniques, this is a huge amount, I think, if you didn't know of these things, of an answer for why. And this is why I'm doing this series, because I think these, if you didn't already know, these whys are very, very useful to be able to, just being aware of these techniques and aware of the history of them, to be able to avoid them as they exist all around you all the time.
Were indivisible, especially when faced with the threat of communism. But Bernays was convinced that to explain this rationally to the American people was impossible, because they were not rational. Instead, one had to touch on their inner fears and manipulate them in the interests of a higher truth. He called it the engineering of consent.
He was doing it for the American way of life, and to which he was devoted. So this sincerely devoted.
The idea of
he
it.
felt the people were really pretty stupid. And that's the paradox. If you don't leave it up to the people themselves, but force them to choose what you want them to choose, however subtly, then it's not democracy anymore. It's something else. It's
Agreed. If you've coerced all of the reactions, if they are not intrinsic to the individual actors, if they're not of their own making, like, even, I mean, yeah, the argument of free will, if it exists at all, it's an interesting one. I don't think it's completely settled, but these techniques certainly muddy the waters and make it such that there's no possibility if you're acting outside of them. The idea is that especially if they're working on these group dynamics and belonging to the group, we're a pack animal. We're very much predisposed to belonging to the pack and fitting in. It means survival in a lot of ways. It means acceptance into the pack will give you access to the food, right? Will give you access to the protection of the group against predators and interlopers. It will give you the opportunity to pass on your genetic material. So it will engage you in, well, one of the strongest impulses for any organism, the biological imperative to pass on our genes. And so the lack of all of those things means that you don't have access to food, you don't have access to protection, and so you're going to be more subject to being picked off by predators, more subject to mental stressors, so you could say mental illness of some sort, and all of these things kind of leading to death. So more likely you're going to die as a pack animal if you're outside of the pack. I believe the human species, human individuals, we know this instinctively. And advertisers work mainly on this, on our fear of death and our fear of, like, sex and sexual mores, those two things, and sometimes in combination, most effectively in combination. But yeah, we're supposed to be in packs though, right? Yeah, no, we've been working in packs. Well, yeah. Death and being alone, absolutely, being isolated. So the rugged individualism, right, and laissez-faire capitalism that drives that idea in an individual citizen, you could say on that basis, is against our evolutionary history and what we're predisposed towards. And so in order to put somebody into that state where they're accepting that, you're going to have to engage in a whole lot of effort to force a pack animal that understands instinctively reciprocity and fairness into being a self-interested, like John Nashian game theory, completely disinterested individual actor. And we're going back to it. Great commentary. Y'all rock. Yes. No, we live, and it's not a democracy either. We live in a hybrid state now. at the very least, and heading towards not even that anymore.
Being told what to do. It's that old authoritarian thing.
But the idea that it was necessary to manipulate the inner feelings of the American population in the interests of fighting the Cold War now began to take root in Washington.
Yep.
Above all, in the CIA, who were going to take it much further. They were concerned that the Soviets were experimenting with psychological methods to actually alter the memories and feelings of people.
Here we go,
being
Martha.
to produce more controllable citizens. It was known as brainwashing.
Oh, they were terrified of this.
Psychologists in the CIA were convinced that this really might be possible, and that they should try to do it themselves.
It led to some really silly research.
The image of the human being that was being built up at that particular time.
The Men Who Stare at Goats is a movie making fun of them.
Vulnerability in every human being, and that vulnerability could be manipulated to program somebody to be something that I wanted them to be, and they didn't want to be.
Yikes.
That you could manipulate people in such a way that they could be automatons, if you will, for whatever your own purposes were. This was the image that people thought was possible.
In the late 50s, the CIA poured millions of
instances.
dollars into the psychology departments of universities across America. They were secretly funding experiments on how to alter and control the inner drives of human beings.
Yeah, absolutely, Martha. Men
The
Who
most
Stare at
notorious
Goats,
of these experiments
absolutely.
was run by the head
The
of the
Monroe
American
Institute.
Psychiatric
Yes.
Association, Dr. Ewan Cameron. Like many psychiatrists at that time, Cameron was convinced that inside human beings were dangerous forces which threatened society.
Cameron is a
He
truly
believed that
evil
it was
person.
possible not just to control these forces, but actually remove them.
He thought that psychiatry should not just concentrate on sick people, mentally ill, but should actually go into government, that politicians should listen to psychiatrists. Psychiatrists should be in every parliament and should direct and monitor
BS.
political activities, because they knew in a rational, scientific way what was good for people.
It's been proven, it's been
Cameron had
tested
set
and
up a clinic
proven
in a
over and
hospital
over and
in
over
Montreal
again. It's total
called the
BS.
Allen Memorial. It is now long since closed down.
Ask James Randi.
Cameron
Talk to the
took
James,
patients
the
who suffered a
Randi
wide range
Institute
of
about
mental
remote
problems.
viewing.
His theory was
There's
that
$1
these
million
resulted from
prize still on
forgotten
the
or
table.
repressed memories. But he was impatient with the idea of using psychotherapy to uncover them. Instead, he would simply wipe them. Cameron used drugs, including LSD, and the technique of ECT, electroconvulsive therapy.
Fucking
It was
hell.
conventionally used at that time to relieve depression. But Cameron was going to use it in a new way to produce new people.
He was really using it to try and change the fundamental function of the individual, to alter their past memories, their past ways of behaving. And as I think he said at one point, it is to just sort of erase everything from their past so that you then had a slate in which you could record new ways of behavior.
Yeah, Martha, you know where this thread is heading. Absolutely. That, you know, they were looking to make, you know, the perfect assassin who would carry out the assassination and not remember anything that had happened, that they do so in a hypnotic trance. I'm going to go into somebody that's investigated some of this and has proven out some of these techniques are possible recently.
And so he used massive doses of shock, people receiving several shocks a day.
It's awful.
And over a course of time,
And they're much more
hundreds of
severe than
ECT,
electroconvulsive therapy now.
so that they were just
These
reduced to
generalized high impact
sort of
shock
a very
treatments.
primitive vegetable state.
It's disgusting.
I don't remember what happened to me.
This poor woman.
I was introduced to Dr. Cameron, and I don't remember Dr. Cameron at all. I don't remember any of that. They shipped me up to what they called the sleep room, and they gave me all of these electroconvulsive shock treatments and megadoses of drugs and LSD and all of that, and I have no memory of any of that. Nothing of that time in the Allen Memorial or any of my life previous to that.
She went in for
all gone,
depression.
wiped.
And then having depatterned somebody or brought them down to where basically nothing but the essential functions of the body were going on in terms
Autonomic
of
functions,
things of this
breathing.
nature. Then he would begin to feed material into these individuals, positive material, such that the brain would be programmed in a positive way, so that the individual would be completely altered.
Then he put these tapes under our pillows called psychic driving. He would then put back into this empty brain a program of whatever sort he decided upon, and the people like myself would wake up another person, I guess.
So psychic driving is the technique that they were using with these tapes. Part of what they were trying to do is seeing if they could get any message to be repeated and remembered. So blank slate, any message can we put into this? Yes, we can do that. Okay. Messages that are somewhat against the personality type of the person that existed before. Okay. Messages that are diametrically opposed to values that this person used to hold before. They tried that. So with this, another individual who's not interviewed in this documentary, it's another documentary on MK Ultra. I've seen this interview where this guy describes how they implanted in him the message that he wanted to kill his mother. And that's where they were testing, can we plant in this person and have them believe messaging that is absolutely opposed to values and beliefs that they hold? And yeah, kind of. But I mean, I think recent evidence shows that these techniques are definitely possible.
In fact, Cameron's experiments were a complete disaster.
They were.
All he managed to produce were dozens of individuals with memory loss.
A severe
and the ability to repeat
memory
the phrase,
loss.
I am at ease with myself. And it was not an isolated case. Almost all the experiments the CIA funded were equally unsuccessful.
He had
Despite
people
their
up in
ambitions,
multiple
American
hospitals.
psychologists were beginning to find out how difficult it was to understand and control the inner workings of the human mind.
We had been really chasing a phantom, if you will, an illusion. That the human mind was more capable of manipulation from the outside by outside factors than it is. We found out that the human being is an extremely complex thing. There were no simple solutions. But you've just got to bear in mind that these were very strange times.
The psychoanalysts had come to power in America because of their theory that they knew how to control the dangerous forces inside human beings.
Yeah.
But now the psychoanalysts were about to face a high-profile failure that would lead people to begin questioning the very basis of their ideas. It began in Hollywood. The film industry had become fascinated by psychoanalysis.
Yep.
And Anna Freud was a powerful influence on dozens of analysts in Los Angeles. They treated
basically
film stars,
reported to
directors,
her.
and studio bosses. Anna Freud's closest friend was the most sought after of all, Ralph Greenson. And in 1960, the most famous star in the world turned to Greenson for help. Marilyn Monroe was suffering from despair and had become addicted to alcohol and drugs.
Well, when I walked in to dinner, here was Marilyn Monroe. And I'd made a picture with her called All About Eve.
This is Dinner at Ralph Greenson.
All
Yes.
About Eve.
And
Pretty good movie.
the only thing was that Ralph was trying to show her, Romy, I never called him Ralph in my life, Romy was trying to show her that
Yeah, poor
the way a
Marilyn.
family life ought really to be. So we were walking the dog after us. I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I said, "You never asked me to dinner." And he said, "You weren't that sick." And I said, "Oh, no." He said, "The point is just this child has no frame of reference.
Of like,
In other words, she doesn't know
the
what
regular
the
family
goal
life.
is."
What Greenson did was follow Anna Freud's theory.
So, Martha, thank you so very much. Absolutely. Yeah, Doug Kramer, what a great voice. Very interesting material. This is an interesting connection here. Seemingly, a lot of these crazies have intelligence agency connections. This is also theorized about Jim Jones and how he ended up in Guyana with like a shed, like an outdoor shed of psychotropic drugs. And if Jonestown wasn't just a massive mind control experiment, absolutely. So also the acid wave in the United States in the 1960s. You talk to people outside of the United States who were maybe also interested in the psychedelic movement, saw what was happening in the United States as perverse and crass and a denigration of everything that they were trying to do. And I think we're the first people, because they saw it as anomalous, to even start to ask the questions if there was something else going on here. And it became very clear in the late 1970s in the Congress's investigation into MK Ultra, and having the Central Intelligence Agency admit clearly that they were experimenting generally on the public, on unwitting subjects of the public, on unwitting members of even their own intelligence agency. Uh, that led very famously to the death of one of their agents. So yeah, I may not stop in this vein and cover all of the things around this stuff that I'm aware of, because I do think it's all useful. And thank you very much for engaging in this conversation this way, Martha. Very, very, very helpful.
If Marilyn Monroe could be taught to conform to what society considered a normal pattern of life, that would help her ego control her inner destructive urges. But Greenson pushed it to an extreme.
Be like a normal
He persuaded
person
Monroe to move into a house nearby that was decorated like his own.
when she's not a normal
He then
person.
took her into his own family life, and he, his wife, and his daughter played at being Monroe's own family. Greenson himself would become the model of conformity.
And so this someone whom she regarded as important and
Yeah, Martha, geez, you keep on doing these awesome, awesome things. Like, this is the perfect bait for me. Yeah, so vice president at the time, right? Hinckley goes after Reagan March of 1981. It's just a few months after being elected, with a vice president who's the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency that he had just beat out in this primary. And all of a sudden, there's a bullet like inches from Reagan's heart by this mad person who wanted to impress Jodie Foster. Yeah. Yeah, Martha, you got that right. Absolutely. Yeah, his second wife. His first wife has a lot to say about all of that. But yeah, you're killing it in here. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
how she idealized. If he
Yeah,
turned
John
out to
Hinckley.
be a very gratifying father figure her ego would benefit from that. That was the theory.
Yep.
His wife and children, everyone was involved. Yeah.
Cue the George Michael.
The person. They were strengthening the mind. They were strengthening the agent that controls inner life.
Put your tiny hand in mine.
Against too much frustration. So that Marilyn Monroe would no longer be a helpless person looking for love. She'd have enough love.
But despite all his efforts, Greenson was unable to help Marilyn Monroe. On August the 5th, 1962, she committed suicide in her house. The suicide shocked many in the analytic community, including Anna Freud. And high-profile...
The problem is, if you're trying to force an extraordinary person like Marilyn Monroe to just like accept normal family this, and that's going to have this calming effect, rather than engaging with them as a person who's like going through an explosion of being exposed to the entire world as a sex symbol, and no one in your life anywhere around you being able to engage with you as you. And whatever you are is being erased by everyone's expectations of what your publicist sold to them. And so you're more what your publicist says you are than anything that you remember that you were. And this drives famous people crazy all the time. Marilyn's just a very, very good example. This is absolutely Martha, you rock. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I mean, Bush was highly critical of Reagan during you know, if you look at the debates, if you look at the rhetoric going into New Hampshire for 80, they were not pals.
Figures in American life who had previously been enthusiasts for psychoanalysis now began to question why psychoanalysis had become so powerful in America. Was it really because it benefited individuals?
No.
Or had it in fact become a form of constraint in the interests of social order?
And they had made
Critics
themselves
included Monroe's
gatekeepers,
ex-husband,
Anna Freud
Arthur Miller.
and her acolytes, gatekeepers of the
My
mind.
argument, so much psychoanalysis, is the preconception that suffering is a mistake, or a sign of weakness, or a sign even of illness, when in fact...
So they had just said that Arthur Miller had, you know, famously been under psychoanalysis in New York and had been like an example of a great success of psychoanalysts, and is now here to say some choice words about maybe their base assumptions and how they could possibly be
Critics
erroneous.
included Monroe's ex-husband, Arthur Miller.
My argument with so much psychoanalysis is the preconception that suffering is a mistake, or a sign of weakness, or a sign even of illness, when in fact, possibly the greatest truths we know have come out of people's suffering. That the problem is not to undo suffering or to wipe it off the face of the earth, but to make it inform our lives, instead of trying to cure ourselves of it constantly and avoid it, and avoid anything but that lobotomized sense of what they call happiness.
Yeah.
There's too much of an attempt, it seems to me, to think in terms of controlling man rather than freeing him, of defining him rather than letting him go. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the whole ideology of this age, which is power mad.
Hey, have you heard about the crazy new way to send a message today? It's flashed on a screen, too quick to see, but still you get it subliminally.
At the same time, an onslaught was launched on the way psychoanalysis was being used by business to control people.
Completely.
The first blow came with the bestseller, The Hidden Persuaders, written by Vance Packard.
We're still in the 1960s here, folks.
Of reducing the American people to
this
emotional
seems pretty
puppets,
persuasive.
whose only function was
and
to keep
that
the mass
it would
production lines
capture almost
They
most
did this by
minds.
manipulating people's unconscious desires to
Most
create longings
minds.
for ever new brands
Nearly
and models.
everyone.
They had turned the population into unwitting participants in the system of planned obsolescence.
Yep.
The second blow came from an influential philosopher and social critic, Herbert Marcuse. He had been trained in psychoanalysis.
This is a childish
Yes, Holly.
application of psychoanalysis, which does not take at all into consideration the very real political systematic waste of resources, of technology, and of the productive process. For example, planned obsolescence.
Yes.
For example, the production of innumerable brands and gadgets who are...
Okay, just for everybody, I'm, not too many people in here, and I don't mean to insult your intelligence. Planned obsolescence, maybe you're all familiar with it, but just for clarity, is in manufacturing, the idea that you would design into your product a lifetime, a shelf life, so that you would be able to not have your product last a lifetime, so that within some amount of time, by some defect, your customer is going to be coming back around the store to get another one, right? So instead of having a car that would last you 50 years, planned obsolescence would have it 7, 10, depending on like the value judgment, and we can make like a scale of value based on like the degree of planned obsolescence that would be designed into your car, so that you're going back, like tires, like everything, like every plastic, everything that we have has some component within it that is going to fail. Every storage medium, everything. So, because say like, they made a product or a light bulb that would last 70 years, which, they did, but say that was widely available, and say that it was like energy efficient and everything. Could they, think of the shelves, all of the stores with shelves and shelves of light bulbs would become obsolete instantly, right? Our economy is based on throwing things away, on things breaking, and us being marketed a solution to that breakage that they designed. Closed system where, they're going to take everything from you now. And now they're coming for your retirement money.
In the last analysis, all the same. The production
Just like Carlin said.
Innumerable different marks of automobiles. And this prosperity at the same time, consciously or unconsciously, leads to a kind of schizophrenic existence.
Yeah. Well, you're engaging in purposelessness.
Incredible quantum of aggressiveness.
Whether you are aware of it or not, it does damage.
Precisely because of the empty prosperity, which then...
the emptiness.
Simply erupts.
Yeah.
Marcuse's argument was not simply that psychoanalysis had been used for corrupt purposes. It was more fundamental. Marcuse said that the very idea that you needed to control people was wrong. Human beings did have inner emotional drives, but they were not inherently violent or evil. It was society that made these drives dangerous by repressing and distorting them. Anna Freud and her followers had increased that repression by trying to make people conform to society. In so doing, they made people more dangerous, not less.
Marcuse challenged that social world, and he said that's a world that should not be adapted to. And in fact, what the individual was adapting to was corrupt and evil.
It's clearly corrupt and evil.
In other words, he switched
its power and
the
money
source of evil
in industrialists' hands,
inward conflict
projected through public relations
society.
And politicians.
That the sickness of society lay at the societal level,
corruption.
Not at the sickness of human beings in it. And if people did not challenge that, then they were, in fact, submitting to evil.
Well, constant electricity on a grid, what they base off, having it always on, yeah, but say, what if that grid of electricity was from renewables, and what if that grid was like, I don't know how Tesla designed it nearly 100 years ago now, that would be broadcast electricity everywhere. And well, it's why they tore down the towers that his proof of concept towers for broadcasting electricity on a large scale, because the bosses at Westinghouse were asking, well, where do you put the meter? If you're just electrifying the air with high frequency electricity, where you don't need a cable, nothing, you just like the light, it turns on, right? So yeah, these concepts have been known, right? So it's not just a grid or having things on a grid, it's the commodification of these basic essential goods, like doing it just like the same way, like freaking whale oil. We're still like buying energy like we're buying whale oil or something. And there's like, well, the whales are scarce this year, so that they're going to triple the price. So yeah.
Modern psychology has a word that is probably used more than any other word in psychology. It is the word maladjusted. It is the ringing cry of modern child psychology, maladjusted. Now, of course, we all want to live the well-adjusted life in order to avoid neurotic and schizophrenic personalities.
Let's not be adjusted to
As
evil,
I move
though,
toward my
which is
conclusion,
where he's
I
going.
would like to say to you today, in a very honest manner, that there are some things in our society and some things in our world for which I'm proud to be maladjusted.
Absolutely.
And I call upon all men of goodwill to be maladjusted to these things until the good society is realized. I must honestly say to you that I never intend to adjust myself through racial segregation and discrimination. I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few and leave millions of God's children smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society.
The political influence of the Freudian psychoanalyst.
I mean, much is made of Martin Luther King Jr. nowadays that I think is incorrect, especially by the right, who try to make him like a cardboard cutout of a few things that he said and ignore how radical he was. And especially at the end, 67 on, after the Riverside Church speech and his opposition to the Vietnam War and engaging in the plight of the economic disparity in the country and making it not just a racial thing, but just poverty as an issue that could unify the nation against these forces. And he made a very, very, very many enemies doing both of those things. But his words like those, just he's got his style, but also his writing. If you just read it on the page without hearing his voice, these words still ring like a bell.
This was over. Instead, they were now accused of having helped to create a repressive form of social control.
Because they did.
Anna
For
Freud
money.
and Dorothy Burlingham lived on in Sigmund Freud's old house in London. In 1970, Dorothy's son Bob died of alcoholism. And in 1973, his sister Mabby returned for yet more analysis with Anna Freud.
She went back for more analysis. She was living at 20 Marisville Gardens in the Freud house, as I guess she did when she wasn't with her husband. And she committed suicide. She took an overdose of sleeping pills.
In Freud's own house.
In Freud's own house, right.
This poor man.
So, I mean, the obvious, there are a lot of implications that one can draw from that, and I just think she happened to reach the end of the rope there. Although it would seem to be a very pointed act. Obviously, suicide is a very politicized act, and to do it in Sigmund Freud's own house is certainly different from doing it in Riverdale back in New York.
Yeah, it is different. Agreed.
Next week's episode will tell the story of the rise to power of the enemies of the Freud family. They believed that the way to build a better society was to let the self free.
But
what they didn't realize was that this idea of liberation would provide business and politics
the encounter
yet
group.
another way to control the self, by feeding its infinite desires.
Yes. Yeah, seriously. Oh, Tony Robbins. Yeah, no, this next step, it's a wonderful way of framing to me how ideology, how rigidly thinking without trying to onboard criticism or new ways of thinking and try to change your ideas as you're faced with new information and everything's changing around you. That ideology, even, the thing that breaks down the old power structures and becomes the new ascendant power, fail for the same reasons of rigidity in their thinking and thinking, okay, so we've conquered this other way of thinking, now like the personal growth and self-actualization and self-discovery movement is going to be this refutation in the late 60s and 1970s and 80s of all of these ideas, but it's falling very much into the same trap. Absolutely, Martha. And people should really talk about this more. Yeah, an offshoot of Scientology that, the main guy there had a bunch of high-level Scientology training and had taken a fair amount of those ideas and had basically hung out his own shingle for the thing. And much later, and with all the disgusting sex cult stuff, Keith Raniere was kind of another one of these, and there are a bunch of them. But I think Est may be one of the first large ones. Some people swear by this stuff, but I would say placebo effect is pretty damn strong. Yes, Earhart. Yeah, exactly. The Earhart seminar training. Yay! Martha to the rescue. Werner Earhart, who, we'll hear from him in the next episode. He shows up and he defends his ideas in some way. So what's interesting about this documentary is that it's critical of all of these people, but they got interviews from most of the main people. Like, actually, Edward Bernays in the first episode at like 100 in a million years, but even still, words from the person direct on the effects, and his close colleagues as well, and his relatives wanting to say what this great and very dark and evil work was. And so for one of these documentaries, I think, is more even-handed than most, where the subjects of this criticism are not only invited to participate, but are on camera, on screen participants. So totally. What's interesting about this kind of a progression, it shows how so often these revolutionary movements that try to overturn these power structures only do so to supplant, to replace them, and then to have the same amount of dominance and hold the same amount of sway and influence and exert the and wield power in the same ways. Oh, no kidding. Absolutely. And he was very successful. And it, well, it was seen as this new thing. And it didn't have to have all the baggage of Scientology. And so people were really positive on Est. And well, a lot of these self-helpy kind of things, that's like you can exist in that world more if you don't have these if the structure of your group doesn't necessitate the kind of controls that you need to be able to keep people into the group. Est was just attractive to people the way Scientology used to be attractive to people. But I mean, still in the 70s, they were still growing. You know, they were onboarding the flower kids. But yeah, I think it seemed LRH was jealous of anybody else that was operating successfully in space. And to me, that's just market share. It's like you talk to certain bands about any other band, they're like, yeah, but we're number one. Like talk to Axl Rose about other bands in 1991, kind of thing. What is the key to keeping an open mind and critical thinking? A lot of information is good, but so there's so much information that you can curate like a massive amount of what seems like a massive amount of information for yourself in a way that still assuages your concerns and supports your notions. So one of the most helpful things for me is to engage in material that's critical of my closely held beliefs and try to, you know, like a scientific idea, to try to disprove my thinking, which is really difficult without an external source that's willing to engage in that way. And so to be exposed to ideas that you're not too fond of and to have discussions with people that have widely differing ideas than you do in an effort to have an exchange. That's for me, that's that's a helpful thing. But even that process, all of these things, we're not ever going to be able to stop ourselves from trying to make these experiences successful for ourselves, and so we always have to look out for these biases, and you know, ways that we will seek out maybe interlocutors that are pushovers, are easy. You know, like if you're trying to disprove, you know, or you're trying to prove the irrationality of like fundamentalist thought in religion, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Hey, Miriam, thank you for joining us at the tail end of well, we're looking at this Adam Curtis documentary. Adam Curtis, this documentarian for the BBC for, I don't know, since the 80s. Real lefty kind of slant on history. And this is part 2 of a documentary series he did called The Century of Self, that's going over the rise of the advertising and public relations industry and how the ideas in psychiatry and psychology from psychoanalysis in these first 2 were used to great effect in the first half of the 20th century to marshal large swaths of populations to do what politicians wanted, or to have those same people give over their money for products that the clients of these advertising agencies would be serving. It's great to see you in here. Yeah. So let's see. I've been going for like 2:15. It's 1:30 here. I bet it's very, very early. Yeah. Oh, Landmark as well. Yes, Landmark is the next extension, from Est into the 80s. Maybe, the but very business oriented, that one. And so it's like Landmark was pointing at Nexium. I wonder how much awareness the Nexium folk had of Landmark, or if how much crossover there is in that Venn diagram, because they both focus a lot on business management training. So yeah, looking forward to joining you all and whoever else for part 3. This was a great discussion. Y'all stepped up to the plate and offered a bunch of thoughts. Sorry if I didn't engage with everything here. I'm not really great with the chat. I'm trying to get better, but kind of winging it. I will put out a notification. It's probably going to be a few days, something, part 3, sometime this week, probably. Starting to get back into the swing of making more kind of content. And absolutely, Kelly, Martha, for the win here. A lot of thought-provoking comments. Again, I find this material to be very thought-provoking. I find these concepts and the awareness of these power systems to be freeing in a multitude of ways, and can start a process of disentangling oneself to these groupthink forces, and these forces that would work upon our minds without our knowledge unless we became aware of them. It's been really fun, y'all. Be good, be well. I'll see you on the next one. Part 3 of The Century of Self by Adam Curtis. Y'all rock. 10:30 a.m. over there. Yeah. So this isn't so bad. I could be like, mid-morning in Europe if I will say hi to Pearl. Thank you. So yeah, tell a friend. Make sure you're subbed, and I'll see you for part 3 later on.